On today's show, is Trey Augustine Michigan State University's best player? And is Dennis Hildeby the solution in net for Toronto? All coming up on today's show on Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hattie Kalikesh, joined by Sebastian High, and on today's show, we're going to have a stacked goalie episode. We're going to talk about three major goalies that are playing really well right now around the prospects world. We're going to start off in the NCAA with a Habs prospect and Jacob Fowler, who's been off to a really hot start and to his NCAA career, and really kind of backstopping the Boston College Eagles, which are a good team. To really good performances so far. We're going to talk about kind of how he's molded his game a bit and adjusted his game to the NCAA style. And then in the second segment, we're going to talk about Trey Augustine. That goalie 10 is probably going to be the 1-2 punch in Team USA's net for the upcoming World Juniors, which we'll cover a lot on this channel. But yeah, Trey Augustine is also off to a really good start, and he might just be Michigan State University's best player. We're talking about a roster that was surprisingly stacked this year. So we'll get into that. And then in our final segment, we'll talk about a Toronto Maple Leafs goalie prospect playing the AHL right now in Dennis Hildeby. The 6'7", 223-pound goaltender has been off to a really good start after some decent performances over in the SHL last year. He's kind of found his footing this year. So we'll talk about him and whether or not he's the solution in net for Toronto moving forward. Before we get into any of that, though, today's show is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use a promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $300 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get it started right off here with Jacob Fowler. I mean, he's been a revelation so far. And for me, it was so strange to see 5 goaltenders picked ahead of him in the 2023 NHL draft. He's solid. He's smart, incredibly smart. And what's been really apparent so far with Boston College is how he manages the game. I mean, he's always there for key saves and key moments, but beyond that, it's just the way he's able to jump on rebounds for Smothers when these kind of defensive situations break down for Boston College and end up spending a minute and a half in their zone. He's quick to those stops. He smothers pucks and covers them well, but also he knows when to kind of throw pucks to the corners for his teammates to pick up when he needs to. So yeah, how much of Jacob Fowler have you watched, and how impressed have you been so far with his play in the NCAA?
I've watched a fair amount, mainly in passing. I mean, this Boston College team has been stacked, and I've definitely been watching them a fair amount.
Yeah.
But he's been really, really impressive. And this was a player I liked a lot last year. I liked the intelligence a ton, but I still had a lot of questions in terms of the overall cohesiveness of his game. Like, this is not an overly conventional goaltender. Yes, he is very intelligent, he's very athletic, but his actual micro adjustments were last season definitely a bit of a question mark, and he made a lot of his saves based off of intelligent positioning and quick reactions more than anything else.
Yeah.
And this season we've seen a Jacob Fowler with a lot more control to his game. I've loved how he's been handling the rebounds so far this season. He's been excellent under heavy pressure. I mean, as good as this Boston College team is, they have had extended sequences in their own zone where it's been minute and a half, 2 minutes stuck in their own zone that I've seen a couple of times, and Fowler just looks so solid, and he's been so impressive. He's been putting up a 9.27 through 15 games now so far this season. He's played basically every game for Boston College, and he's playing at an elite level. So excellent progression so far. But yeah, the intelligence there is always kind of the most appealing tool in his toolkit, and that is so apparent this season.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, you look at what Augustine has kind of modified in his in his kind of ability, his style, especially from last year to this year. Last year, I think the one word we can agree upon for Fowler was chaotic. He was he was really good at making those desperation saves, but was kind of putting himself in those situations more often than not, where he was kind of throwing himself at rebounds and rebounds that he could have smothered, that he could have collected calmly. But this year I feel he's playing a bit deeper, and you want your goaltenders, especially when they have that lateral ability, that ability to go from left to right really quickly. You want them to be able to play a bit higher in net, because that kind of aids their style. But that's more for moving forward. Right now, where he is, I'm very comfortable with the modification he's brought to his game, where he's playing a bit deeper, because it forces him to work on those micro adjustments. It forces him to shuffle very lightly and to modify his posture very intricately. Whereas before, he would have to basically sprawl all the way to the right, and it has less control to it. And I feel like that fine motor control of just his footwork, that kind of stuff, is really going to help. And it also helps him kind of develop a better technique, because he has to fill more net. He's not the biggest. He's 6'2". He's quite heavy at almost 230 pounds, but in terms of his height, he's not really, his shoulders aren't covering the top of the net. So when he's playing deeper, he's covering less net. And we saw that with Henrik Lundqvist throughout his career. He played like half the game with his back inside the net. Like, it was just, he was playing that deep. But the thing with Lundqvist is he was able to get on top of the circle. He was able to challenge players high when he needed to. It's just when the puck goes low to high, he goes deep so that he has better vision, right? I feel like with Fowler, you're going to have to work his vision, his awareness even higher up, especially his puck tracking. You'll need to work that up a lot for him to be able to play that style, which is why I think that right now, as he is, it's helping him develop those tools. But as he moves forward, I'd rather see him be a bit more aggressive, because that's more kind of where his comfort zone lies. You can see him a bit uncomfortable in that. But overall, the performances have been ridiculous with Fowler, and I've been fairly impressed. And again, like, what do you think explains the fact that 5 goaltenders were picked ahead of him, including two, I think, two overagers? Like,
Yeah.
it was very strange. We had it was Damien Carr and Adam Gajan who were picked ahead of him, and Gajan was the first goalie picked of that bunch. Trey Augustine, who
Yeah.
we talk about, was picked right after. Like, what do you think explains that?
They were bigger. I mean, like, Fowler to me was he's my second favorite goaltender in that draft class. Like, Trey Augustine was definitely quite clearly my favorite of the draft
Mhm.
class. And at this point, I think that those two are very much a bit of a toss up in terms of who is a more valuable prospect and who projects better.
Yeah.
But yeah, I never quite got it with Gajan and Hrabal. We had extensive talks about both those players in our meetings at Double Prospects, and
Yeah.
they were both guys that our goalie scout, Colin Hunter, was quite skeptical about, in terms of, like, yes, both Gajan and Hrabal are incredible. Like, they're massive, they're very athletic, right? Like, they're have all the tools, right? But
Yeah.
the actual toolkit is a lot more abstract with those players than it was with even a Jacob Fowler. Like, yes, there were these elements of desperation where he would overextend in his transitions because
Mhm.
he's so explosive in those movements, but the intelligence was something that, to me, always anchored his tools into something that was a lot more projectable to my mind
Yeah.
than player like Adam Gajan was. And I
Mhm.
had Fowler ranked over Hrabal. Like, I still had him ranked lower than I should have. I think I had Fowler ranked like 59th or something, in a tier that went all the way up to like the top of my second, but
Yeah.
that was still a bit low compared to now, with even just a couple months of hindsight.
Mhm.
I gone back and watched some of his draft year footage, and I have a bit of a new lens there, where I think he'd be more in my like late first round rather than late second at
Yeah.
this stage already, because his progression has just been so tremendous and just so consistent. Like, I've been seeing progression game to game with Fowler. It hasn't just been an off-season jump. Like, it wasn't just a massive shift, and he started off the season playing as well as he is now. Like, he's been
Yeah.
consistently improving game to game. Like, he's gaining not only confidence but composure and calmness, and
Yeah.
it's been a joy to watch. Like, he's definitely one of the most enjoyable college goaltenders to watch.
100%. I mean, the mental game of the mental part of his game, he's got nailed down, which is not something I can say for any of the goaltenders that are picked ahead of him. He has
Yeah.
the mentality of a pro goaltender, and I think that goes a lot further than a lot of people think. Um, a lot of what happens between the pipes is between the head, is between the ears as well. Like, your goaltender needs to have that clutch element, that composure, that calmness, that awareness. Um, and that motivation to be the best player on the ice, because sometimes you have to be. Like, that's what wins you cups, and that's why he was such a key part of the Youngstown Phantoms as they won the USHL Cup. I mean, that was another big part of that.
Putting up
But
a
yeah,
950 save percentage in that playoff run.
yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, yeah, he fully deserves his flowers right now, and we'll be looking forward to see what he does come mid-December as the roster is shortened and he starts battling it out with Trey Augustine. I feel like he wants to prove people wrong, and if there's anyone to steal the starting goaltender spot from Trey Augustine, is going to be Fowler. But yeah, that wraps things up for our first segment. Now we'll get into our second segment where we talk about Trey Augustine, what he's been doing for Michigan State, and why he might just be Michigan State University's best player, including Artyom Levshunov. We'll get into that after these messages from our sponsors over at Sleeper.
The new NHL season is here, and it comes with all sorts of possibilities. Cole Caulfield could score 50 goals. Your favorite NHL team could hoist the Stanley Cup, and you can get involved with the Sleeper Daily Fantasy Hockey app. Sleeper is our number one choice at the Locked On NHL network because with it, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is correctly predict the outcome of 8 specific player stats, and you can choose among the stars of the league to produce, whether it be Connor McDavid or other young guns like Leo Carlson, Adam Fantilli to get onto the score sheet, or you go with your favorite fourth liner of your favorite team to get a rare NHL goal. The choice is yours with Sleeper. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability.
Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment, we'll talk about Trey Augustine, the recent second-round pick of the of the Detroit Red Wings. Sorry, at 41st overall in this past 2023 NHL draft. Just such good technique on this player. I mean, he's not the biggest, but he uses his size exactly the way you need to when you're smaller as a goaltender. He's not going to cover the net entirely with his frame, so he has to use high-end footwork, really good agility, really good puck tracking. He's got all that nailed down. The main thing you want to work on with Trey Augustine is just his ability to stay in games and be consistent. He does tend to make big saves at big moments, and that's why I think he's probably Michigan State University's best player, is just because he's always there for them when things go south. And this is a Michigan State roster that's really stacked itself up this past year. I mean, Isaac Howard is their key offensive force. They got Artyom Levshunov obviously on D. That's going to be a really good 2024 NHL draft prospect, probably top 10. And you add to that the fact that they've got a decent couple of pieces around that. Victor Hertig, who's a junior who's been playing really good. He was drafted by the Devils. Red Savage as well. I mean, there's a lot to like about this Michigan State roster, but for me, Augustine has just been such a key part of their ability to stay in games. But it's just, there are times where, it does seem like a bit too much pressure on an 18-year-old freshman playing his first year in the NCAA. So, yeah, I mean, what's your thoughts on Augustine first getting picked at 41st overall, I think as a second goalie off the board? And second, how has he been so far this year, in your opinion?
Yeah, I thought he dropped a lot lower than he should have. Like, Augustine was the one goalie that I was personally comfortable with picking in the first round on draft day. And I think that the fact that a D+1 went over him, especially a D+1 with as raw of a toolkit as Adam Gajan, I had questions about that pick. Yeah. But I think Detroit landed a great player. And I know some people were asking questions of like, well, they already have Sebastian Cossa coming in and like XYZ other goaltenders currently in the NHL, like Ville Husso's on a pretty big contract. But yeah, I think it was an excellent draft selection, and like the fact that he was available at 44, was it 40 something? Like 41. He shouldn't have been. Yeah, he shouldn't have been. And he was the most calm, composed, consistent, impressive goaltender I watched in that draft class. And since then, I've been really impressed with how he started off in college. Like, this is the Michigan State team that kind of got like catapulted into like the top programs of the entire league this season. That was not really expected going into this year. So Augustine committed to a team that is not one of the typical big name like attractors in the NCAA, and that risk has paid off with that commitment because they've been excellent. And as you said, like he's one of their best players. Like it's definitely a toss up between him, Levshunov, Howard are probably the three names that come to mind from my view that I've been most impressed with Michigan State. But Augustine has just consistently been a calming force in the crease and is also allowing his players to take risks. Like we've been seeing Levshunov really activate far more consistently over the course of the season. The more he's realized that Trey Augustine is one hell of a goaltender, and allowing high-end players like Levshunov to take those risks and develop their own games and try to create offensively is a really big thing for that program.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen it this year. I mean, Levshunov is being trusted with big moments. You know, for example, he'll be the starting defenseman at 3-on-3 overtime, playing the most minutes, you know, getting double shifted in OT. And the thing with Levshunov is he hasn't yet kind of grasped the risk reward element of playing defense in the NCAA. And yeah, there was one particular shift I watched. I think it was against Wisconsin, or maybe it was the recent game against University of Minnesota. It was against Minnesota. It was in overtime. Levshunov made 3 turnovers at 3 different moments where he was like below the hash marks in the offensive zone, and he would like make a risky pass. And as a defenseman, your job is to maintain possession in OT. Like your job is to get back to the point with possession as smoothly as possible. And instead, it's good to see him activate. It's good to see him deep in the offensive zone. It's just managing that risk reward element and knowing that you're already taking a risk by being in that position. Don't take a second risk by throwing a puck in a like through a pinhole of a passing lane. Like, yeah, 3 different breakaways in the same shift for that Augustine, like he saved all 3 of them. Like he's just he's being fed like these highlight reel plays. And even though he's already facing a lot of shots. I mean, the recent game against Minnesota I'm talking about was a 3-3 tie in overtime where Augustine faced 47 shots and he saved 44 of them. And I'd say like a third of those were high danger chances. Like he's being fed these highlight reel plays. And like, yeah, he allowed 6 recently against Minnesota as well in the game after that, where they lost 6-5 in OT. He allowed 6 goals on 41 shots. But like, if you count the amount of high danger saves he's made versus a player like, I don't know, Jacob Fowler, it's probably similar. Like they're probably making the same amount of high danger saves, but Augustine's just allowing more shots because he's facing a higher number of the, you know what I mean? Like I feel bad for Augustine for being in this position. But at the same time, I feel like this is good for his game because he's learning how to be a really good player on, you know, playing in front of players who take a lot of risks. And like, if you want to develop as a goaltender, the more high danger shots you face, the better. I mean, as long as you're able to save them, because then your confidence get hit. And like I said, a lot of what happens between the pipes is between the ears. So yeah, I'm looking forward to see what happens with Augustine here. But yeah, do you think this looks like a kind of like an early development for Augustine that looks really good for the rest of his career? Like, do you think that this is the type of play that, you know, we can expect from Augustine moving forward, or is it just kind of the adrenaline of being in the NCAA the first year?
He's been good as advertised. Like he's had some outstanding performances, but this is a goaltender that has had outstanding performances going back to his D-1 season, and he's just really consistently impressed me in my viewings over the past 2 years. Like I remember watching him in the World Juniors as a D-1, and he was the best goaltender on that Team USA. When he wasn't even draft eligible yet, and that has only progressed since then. Like his development is consistently progressing. He is taking those steps, and I'm really not concerned in terms of his projection. Like in a redraft, he'd be an easy first rounder for me, whereas he was a bit of a fringe, like top end of the second round for me going into draft day. But just like Jacob Fowler, he's convinced me a lot more. Like I think that NCAA starts tell a lot of the story with goaltenders. Like, yes, you have some goaltenders that obviously like kind of flame out afterwards. Like Caden Primo had a tough time after his NCAA career, but you see a lot more out of a goaltender at that level than compared to like the USHL play that we saw from both goaltenders before in their draft seasons last year. And Trey Augustine has he's come to play in the NCAA for sure.
Oh, absolutely. It's going to be really fun to see him and Fowler battle it out in the net for Team USA at these World Juniors. I am so excited. This is like It's Christmas for everyone, but it's like double Christmas for us. But yeah, that wraps things up for our second segment. We'll talk about Dennis Hildeby, who might just be the solution in Toronto for their goaltender situation. We'll get into that after these messages from our sponsors over at Indeed. If you're looking to add new talent to your company, with turnover being at an all-time high, and it can kind of get out of control really easily, I think Indeed is a fantastic solution in order to kind of mitigate the difficulty that a lot of companies have in terms of adding talent to their team. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. You don't need to spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills, sift through a bunch of CVs and emails. All that you can do with Indeed. You can find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. Instant Match, especially, is really interesting. Basically, you can put out you can put out an invitation to candidates to apply through Instant Match, and they're 3 times more likely to apply to your job than the candidates who only see it in search, according to US Indeed data. It's very interesting that with Instant Match, as soon as you sponsor a post, you get that short list of quality candidates whose resumes really kind of fit what you're looking for as a company, and what's in your job description. You can invite them to apply right away. So you can join over 3 million businesses using Indeed worldwide to gain to gain great talent really fast. Indeed knows that when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count, and that's why with Indeed you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. So visit Indeed.com/locked on to start hiring right now. That's Indeed.com/locked on. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. But if you need to hire, you need Indeed. Alrighty, so moving on to our third segment, we're going to talk about Dennis Hildeby, a prospect who was kind of confounding to me because when he got drafted in the 4th round by the Toronto Maple Leafs in the 2022 NHL draft, I thought there were a decent couple of options that were probably kind of ahead of him in that conversation. He was a twice overager, I believe, when he was drafted. Like he was not a young guy. But yeah, he's been looking really, really good so far. I mean, the year that he was drafted, we're talking 2021-22, he played 12 games in the J20 League with a 931 save percentage. And in 7 games in the SHL, he put up a 931 save percentage with a 1.93 goals against average in 7 games and 5 starts. Really interesting numbers. But then last year, in a larger sample size, in his first year post-draft, he got loaned out again to the same team, Färjestad in the SHL, put up a 918 save percentage, 2.26 goals against average, in a 21 game sample. I think that is fairly interesting for a team that wasn't necessarily strong in Färjestad. They weren't necessarily a powerhouse of the SHL, and he was carrying them to really good results. He played 2 games at the end of the year in the AHL. 849 save percentage, 5.28 goals against average. Nothing to talk about there. We just ignore that. But yeah, this year has been fantastic for him with the Toronto Marlies. A 935 save percentage, 1.63 goals against average in 8 games. And that's with a record of 3-3-2. Like he doesn't have a winning record, and he's still putting out these numbers. He has 2 shutouts in 8 games. Like, yeah, what's the gas here? Because I mean, we're talking about a player that is 6'7", 220 pounds, like, and can make saves at a decent level for a team that is decent but not overwhelmingly good. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean he's a big goalie who makes saves.
Yeah.
What more can you ask for? He's been really, really good. Like I remember being like surprised by just how good his numbers were last year after being drafted, because when he was picked, like I kind of just wrote it off as your typical Maple Leafs flyer on, big goalie, see what happens. It's happening. Like things are happening. Like
Certainly happening.
He's doing things. And I mean, this season, like as you said, a 935 is amazing with the Toronto Marlies. What makes it even better is when you look at what the other 2 goaltenders with the Marlies have been doing. Keith Petruzzelli and Martin Jones both have NHL experience, and both are at an 870 and 873 respectively, compared to the 935, which is a big gap between goaltenders. And Hildeby's definitely slotting himself in as a starter with the Marlies, which is very impressive, especially considering that Martin Jones was playing NHL minutes last season, decent NHL minutes with Seattle last year. So yeah, he's been very impressive. Like, he's really big. I've liked how he tracks the puck. His movement is really explosive from side to side, as you'd expect from a 6'6" goaltender. There's a lot of muscle in those legs.
Yeah.
I've seen him like overcommit in his transitions a bit, which is, I mean, again, expected for a goalie who weighs like almost 230 pounds. Like, a lot of weight to stop in those transitions make it tough to pin down exactly where to stop and to not overextend. But
Yeah.
there's some details there to iron out. But this is a goalie got drafted 2 years ago. Like, yes, he's 22, 23 now, but he has a lot of time to develop. But he's playing excellent hockey right now, and the Leafs always have a need for goaltenders. So I'm sure he's gonna get a shot in the NHL at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Might not be this season, which is probably for the best. I think having an entire season with consistent play in the AHL is quite positive for young players, and especially goaltenders. Like, as you said, it's such a massive mental game. Getting a call up, having 2 bad games in the NHL, getting sent back down, that can be a real wrench into a very good season otherwise.
Yeah.
So if I were Toronto, I'd be taking this development a bit slowly and cautiously, but the early return has been spectacular.
Yeah, and I agree with you for 2 main reasons. First and foremost, I think that Dennis Hildeby is going to be a strain, not just like a pressure test, not just on the development staff, but also on the medical staff. Because there's one thing you have to worry about with big goaltenders, like above 6'6" goaltenders who've got a lot of weight. It's just when they go in the butterfly, that's a lot of weight going down on the knees. You got to be really careful with that, and I feel like that's going to be kind of a pressure test on the medical staff in Toronto to see how they're able to kind of help Hildeby develop in ways that doesn't really harm his long-term potential, because we saw it with Ben Bishop, we saw it with a lot of really good and really big goaltenders. Even looking back at Devin Dubnyk and stuff like that, like there are a couple examples of bigger goaltenders who got injured really quickly because there's a lot of strain, a lot of weight going down on not just the knees but the hips as well, taking a lot of weight. Like, lower body injuries are very frequent with bigger goaltenders, and that's the main concern you'll have to look out for. But if Hildeby can kind of stay healthy, oh my goodness. The other reason I am on the page of just leaving him in the AHL to develop is just that Joseph Woll is hard to hate. I mean, this is a goalie who's currently playing really well for Toronto, making saves, befriending wildlife. Like, his life is weird, man. Like, he's always doing something different, and he's really hard to hate, and he's also performing very well in Toronto. So I think that that's another big reason that I think that Toronto should be patient with that, because they have they've got a decent goalie, riding a decent wave of good performances, and why not? Another reason I leave in there, obviously, is just that Hildeby isn't done. Like, he hasn't done cooking. Like, there's more there. You can develop into an even better, kind of more composed, more mature kind of goaltender. I'd like to see him leave the crease a bit more, make plays outside of his crease where he's stopping pucks behind the net, intervening, jump starting breakouts, that kind of stuff. He's not as comfortable on the puck as other goaltenders, including Jacob Fowler, who honestly, like, on the puck is so fun to watch. Like, he doesn't overdo it. He's not like Mike Smith, who just leaves his net every chance he gets and tries to handle every puck because, like, all eyes on me, please. Like, not that kind of player. But when he leaves the net, it's with purpose, with intent, and with accuracy. Like, he jump starts breakouts with really accurate, like, stretch passes, that kind of stuff. So I'm interested to see how Hildeby kind of develops more of a puck handling game as well, because it's a part of the game as a goaltender you can't ignore. Like, we're not in a league where you can just, like, stay in your crease and let your defenseman take every single dump in. Like, you need to take pressure off their backs at times. So I'm very interested to see how that develops. Any closing words on Dennis Hildeby, what you'd like to see from him moving forward, that kind of stuff?
Keep stopping pucks. Like,
Yeah.
keep up the 935 save percentage. I think that would be great for him.
100%.
No, I mean, I agree with you. I think there's definitely still details there to iron out. But the fact that he's performing at this impressive of a level, yes, of course, small sample size, 8 games. We're not talking about a massive sample at all. But he's been playing some excellent hockey. I caught the games he played against the Rocket, and the game he played one, right? Yeah, he played the one game against the Rocket, and he was really impressive in that game, and was making some very big saves on some pretty talented young players that Laval has. So I think patience is the key here. I think with goaltenders in general, patience is the main thing, like goaltenders develop in a very non-linear fashion, and there are likely going to be some speed bumps in Hildeby's development in the next couple of seasons, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of potential here, and I think that waiting it out and being patient is really going to be worthwhile for the Leafs.
100%. And a reminder to our listeners, be patient with goalies, because probably the
They're
last
weird.
goaltender that played in like their early 20s was what, Marc-Andre Fleury and like Carey Price, and they were both top 5 picks. Like, it's just
Carter Hart,
Carter
right?
Hart, yeah, but look at him now. Like, it's just it's
You constrained to early 20s. I was going based off of that metric.
absolutely. But yeah, that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They're a 24-hour news channel for Locked On Sports channel. You can check out everything from MLB to NFL to hockey to anything going on around the sports world. They got you covered. And make sure to tune in for our next shows as we kind of start our World Juniors coverage a bit early, answer some questions, kind of see where that goes, and just ramp up the excitement as the second wave of Christmas hits early. This has been Hattie Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.